Wait.
Hello! Welcome to Sandy Puck Short Ones. Hey buddy. This series is all about distilling an RPG's rule set down to its barest essentials and giving it to you in 5 minutes or less. That way you can skip all the boring stuff, get it on the table, and play with your friends ASAP. Wonderful. No! No! Today we're going to be talking about the most popular and biggest role-playing game in the world, Dungeons & Dragons. Specifically, we're going to be talking about 5th edition. 5th edition is the newest and most popular edition of Dungeons & Dragons right now. So, let's talk about dice. RPGs are all about dice. Dungeons & Dragons in particular uses these guys right here, D20s. D20s are 20-sided dice, and they will make up the fundamental sort of randomizer of almost all of your rolls. So you're going to want a couple of them. Eventually you'll get addicted to buying incredibly fancy dice like I have right here, but in the beginning you can just start with some basic ones. Just go to the store and see what you like. You'll also need a bunch of other dice depending on what your characters are. So certain characters and weapons and monsters use different dice when they're rolling damage. You're going to need some D6s, you're going to need some D10s, you're going to need some D8s. You're going to need some more D6s. You're going to need some D4s. You're going to just need D&D 5th edition is about 3 main roles. That's 3 roles that essentially go over everything you're going to do whenever you're playing the game. The first one, and the most important one, is the attack roll. This is when you take a d20, like we talked about before, you add a number from your character sheet that we call a modifier, and then you add a situational modifier sometimes. Sometimes your character has a special ability or something else that gives them a little bonus to this. And then you see if the number that comes up is better than the AC or armor class of whatever it is you're trying to hit. Everything in the game has this armor class or AC, and you've got to meet it or you've got to beat it before you're allowed to do damage or do any cool stuff. The other roll you're going to be doing is a check, sometimes known as a skill check. These are very similar to the attack rolls. You're going to be taking the d20 again, you're going to be rolling that, adding another number from your character sheet, adding any other modifiers that you and your GM come up with, and then you're going to be seeing if you beat what's known as a DC, or a difficulty class, I think it's called. These are set by the GM. They're often kind of wiggly in where they fall, but they generally relate to how hard the task is you're trying to do. Oh, also, there's saving throws. Just take another d20 and roll that and add what's known as an ability modifier. What's a saving throw? Well, the saving throw happens when something really bad happens to your character, like if they get poisoned or set on fire or something like that. And yeah, it really just boils down to another time when you roll a d20 and you add another number from your character sheet. Some characters are better at certain kinds of saving throw than others, so if someone tries to mentally possess a wizard, they're going to have a bad time, or if someone tries to poison a barbarian, it's going to be difficult. But by and large, again, rolling a d20, adding a number. You know, most of D&D really just boils down to rolling a d20 and adding a number from your character sheet. That's it! Okay, that's not really it. There's a little more to it. Let's dig in. So, what's a character sheet? Well, a character sheet's basically like your character's resume. You're going to make one of these at the beginning of the game, and it's going to determine how good you are at certain things, and it's going to be a place where you can log your loot, and your experience points, and all of your special powers, and all that kind of stuff. Here's one. A character sheet has what are known as abilities. Abilities are, in D&D, strength, dexterity, wisdom, charisma, constitution, and intelligence. And these are going to be the fundamental grounding of your character. You're going to put a bunch of numbers in these, you're going to roll a bunch of dice to determine that, or you can select specific numbers from a list. There's a lot of different ways to determine your ability scores. Anyway, you're going to take those ability scores and they're going to give you what's known as a modifier. These range from, usually in the beginning, -1 to about +3 in the top end, although as you level up they're going to get really, really big. That's the number that you're going to add to a lot of your rolls. As well as abilities, you've also got skills. Skills are things like swimming and climbing and jumping, and in older editions of D&D there were hundreds of these, and in D&D 5th edition there's 16. When you do a check, that was the second roll we talked about earlier, you're going to take a number from that and add it in. In addition,
You've also got what's called proficiencies sometimes. Each class has a proficiency number that they add to their saving throw roll. Wizards get 1 to, I think, intelligence rolls, for example. You'll note I've been talking about classes like Wizard and Barbarian a couple of times. Let's talk about what a class is, shall we?
That's enough moving around for now, I think. Classes. Classes are basically like job titles, if your character sheet is your resume in this ridiculously strained metaphor. In D&D, there are a bunch of classes, and they all have different unique class abilities that differentiates them from one another. So the Wizard has a spell book from which they memorize spells, and then they can cast them. The Barbarian is angry, I guess. Some class abilities are better than others, I guess. This video right now, and I just realized that I forgot to mention feats. Feats are kind of like class abilities. Lots of classes have unique feats to them. Some of them are shared, and they represent training, special abilities, and powers, and what have you. You usually pick these as you level up. Every other level, I think, gives you a feat. Feats are good. Feats are useful. I probably should have mentioned them at some point during the video, but I'm mentioning them now. You've got the Barbarian, the Bard, the Cleric, the Druid, the Fighter, the Monk, the Warlock, the Wizard, and the Rogue, the Sorcerer, and the Ranger, and the Paladin. That's a lot. Didn't used to be that way. In old D&D, you had slightly fewer classes. But classes tend to be better at some weapons than others. They tend to have different roles on the battlefield. So the Wizard is usually thought of as kind of like a glass cannon artillery thing. They stay at the back, they sling a whole bunch of dangerous spells at the enemies, and then the Fighter's supposed to be up front fighting and blocking enemy attacks and that sort of thing. They also have hit dice that differentiates them from each other. What's a hit dice, I hear you ask? Well, health, or HP as it's known in D&D, is a representation of how much juice your character has. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio. Your character doesn't know that they have, like, 30 HP or whatever. It's kind of supposed to be a mix of how lucky they are during combat, how much scrapes and scratches they've got, and so on. How much HP they have largely depends on the hit die. Hit die is unique for each character. Well, not unique, but, you know, a fighter has a larger hit dice than a wizard does. A hit dice is literally a dice, and you roll it on every level up to see how much extra HP you have whenever you level up. You also sometimes add some numbers, and you can get different abilities that make it so that your hit dice gets modified in different ways. When your HP hits 0, our old friend the D20 comes in again, and you start rolling what are called death saves. Death saves are really, really simple. You roll a d20, and if you get 10 or above, you succeed, and if you get 9 or below, you fail. If you succeed 3 times in a row, that's great. You survive, you're stabilized, and you don't die. If you roll 9 or below, well, answers on a postcard. Combat is really important in D&D. It's basically the backbone of it, so let's talk about that a little bit. The combat rules for D&D are pretty involved, and you could spend a long time reading them and figuring out exactly how to do basically anything you can or do in combat in Dungeons and Dragons. For now, we're just going to talk about the basics. We're going to go over the 1-2s, you know. So, how do you start a fight in D&D? Well, first of all, you roll initiative. Not really first of all, but for our purposes, first of all. You take a d20 again, you roll it, you add your dexterity modifier, and that will determine where you fall on the initiative order, where you're going to take your action in relation to all of your other friends. When your turn comes up, you have the ability to do 2 things. First of all is move. You move whatever your character's speed is. That's another number that's going to be on your character sheet that you'll fill in at the beginning of the game. And then you also get to take an action. There are a lot of actions in D&D. The most common ones you're going to be doing is either attacking or casting a spell, depending on what class you are. But there are a bunch. You can help people, you can defend, you can dodge, you can make a panini, you can do all sorts of stuff. It's a really wide variety of things. And also, your character probably has a whole bunch of stuff that only they can do on their turn. So, take a look at your character sheet again. When you take one of these actions, generally speaking, you will follow the specific rules for your character doing that action. So, a fighter doing an attack will have on their sheet rules for how much dice they roll when they swing their sword, how they're going to try to hit the enemy, and then your special abilities that you will use in place of these standard actions will also have special rules for how to handle them. Just check your character sheets and check your books on your feats and your abilities and your powers and that sort of thing. Christ, look at that clip of that floor. D&D has a number of settings. They've had a variety of them probably since the inception of the game. But the current D&D 5th edition that is set explicitly in a multiverse, which is to say it acknowledges all of the various settings as its core setting. And that said, the main one that you want to be reading about is probably called Forgotten Realms. Forgotten Realms is the sort of basic fantasy setting. It's fine. It's a high fantasy world. There's magic, there's political intrigue, there's nations. Generally speaking, you'll be playing in a place called Faerun, which is sort of like a Eurasian-style, low technology, 14th century style setting. I would recommend anybody check out some of the more exciting settings like Spelljammer and Dark Sun. Dark Sun is set on a sort of desolate Mad Max-esque desert planet where water is scarce and metal is impossible to come by, and Spelljammer is sort of space pirates with magic and what have you. That about does it for D&D 5th edition. It's not my favourite system in the world, but what it does very well. It's a combat-focused tabletop RPG that gives you oodles and oodles of options to create an interesting character that can do fights interestingly. And if the stuff that comes in the box and the books isn't enough for you, the fan base is enormous and is more than happy to produce more content than you could ever hope to play in a lifetime. The DM's Guild is a way that they produce this content, so check that out. And the core content that's made for it also is of an absurdly high quality. Wizards of the Coast is the largest tabletop gaming company in the world, and it shows. The books are phenomenally well put together, the art is incredible, and in general it's just a very well put together project. Check it out if it sounds interesting to you. I've probably got more than one rule wrong for this game, so make sure you read the rule books before you play. But these videos are designed to give you sort of a general idea about what you might or might not be interested in checking out. Hope that was informative for you. See you next time.